Tonight, we drift across the misted hills of Western Ireland around the year 900, where Atlantic rain softens the dusk, and a Hillfort's firelight beckons you into a quiet night on the eve of Samhain, the ancient festival marking the end of harvest and the beginning of the dark half of the year. If you enjoy this video, please consider subscribing. Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's begin our journey to 10th century Ireland. You've been on the road since morning, carrying a satchel that's grown heavier with absorbed damp. The path climbs steadily now, each step pulling you higher into weather that smells of salt and iron. You're a scribe, sent from the coast to deliver a letter inland before month's end, though the messenger who gave it to you warned that the crossings would be lonely so late in the year. The western rain drifts in a fine veil that beads along your cloak and darkens the heather. Somewhere below, a stream threads between stones, talking to itself in low vowels. And far off, the Atlantic meets the cliffs with an unhurried thrum. When you lift your eyes, a circle of warm color hovers above the slope, a crown of firelight where people have kindled a blaze against the long evening. You think of dry clothes and something hot to drink. It's been 2 days since you saw another traveler, and the sight of human fire quickens your pace. The shape that gathers from the mist is not a castle, but a ringfort, a circular enclosure built of earth and timber, the kind raised by Gaelic farmers across Ireland centuries ago. A deep ditch runs around the outside, the soil piled into an inner bank topped with a wooden palisade whose wet stakes glisten in the light. Within the ring stand round houses of wattle and thatch, a byre, a low shelter for cattle, and a yard stacked with tools and winter fuel. These forts were made less for war than for the ordinary defenses of life. A dry place for grain, a safe pen for livestock, a fence against wind and wandering animals. The fort sits high on the hill so that its people can see far. As you draw nearer, you see that the fire ahead is far too large for a single household. It burns high on the hilltop, where such blazes are kindled each autumn, its light wavering across the wet turf. Figures move around it, their shadows long and fluid against the earth, and the air carries a low hum of voices, part song, part laughter. You realize what night it must be. The eve of Samhain, the old festival that marks the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter. In early Ireland and across the Celtic world, the year was divided into a light half and a dark half, and Samhain was the point where one turned into the other. Families gathered livestock from the fields, finished the last work of autumn, and prepared for the long months indoors. Bonfires were lit on high ground to bless the land and herds, and people carried home embers to rekindle their hearths from the shared flame. Offerings of food and drink were left for neighbors and for wandering spirits, since the night was believed to be a time when the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin. Even in the early 10th century, when monasteries and Christian calendars were well established, rural communities still kept the older rhythm of the seasons, alongside newer observances. The Hillfort ahead glows with that same mixture of practicality and reverence, a gathering at the turning of the year.
The gate swings inward, and you step beneath the dark timbers into a circle of life kept close to the fire. Rain slides from your cloak's hem and gathers in small pearls along the satchelled strap, the unopened letter thumping softly against your hip with each step. Voices ring low and steady, the kind that carry through wet air without pushing, while a cow shifts its weight and a tethered goat shakes rain from its ears. The smell of peat smoke, sweet, earthy, a little tang of bog, threads through the sharper scents of damp wool, trampled grass, and fresh-cut wood. Around the wide blaze, people turn to look, a quick weighing of your face and your posture, not cold, not eager, simply careful in the way of households guarding their evening. The gatekeeper, broad-shouldered and spare with words, tips his chin towards the fire and guides you to the outer edge of the circle, where the light first touches the dark. Here you stand a moment, water ticking from your sleeves, and let the warmth climb your fingers while the murmurs knit you into their rhythm. Hospitality begins not with questions but with warmth and food. A wooden bowl finds your hands, heavy with barley broth clouded golden and studded with leek, carrot, and the soft cubes of roasted root, steam rising in fragrant ribbons that fog your lashes. A wedge of oat bread, coarse and comforting, sits beside a slice of mild cheese, its rind pale as moonlit wattle. Someone pours a measure of milk from an iron pot, not boiling but warmed to the edge of sweet, and the heat loosens your jaw and quiets the hollow in your chest. An old woman, her hair braided and tucked beneath a simple scarf, settles a rough woven shawl over your shoulders, with a touch that expects nothing in return. A child, solemn as a steward, nudges a three-legged stool into the dry patch behind you and waits until you lower yourself with a grateful nod. The talk that reaches you is gentle and practical. Where the sheep grazed at noon, which fence slat needs pegging, whose son mended the harrow, and when a question finally comes your way, it is only where your road began, and whether your boots held up against the bog track. Work carries on around you, and joining it eases the edge of strangeness. You follow a young man to the peat stack and pass him sods the colour of shadow. He builds a careful nook of fuel by the blaze, then hands you a willow basket because he sees you can lift without strain. A girl with quick wrists teases wool into a cloud and fades it to a spindle, the fibre turning into a tight thread that hums with each spin. When she pauses, you try the twist she shows you, your fingers learning the pull and release until the line lies smooth. At the far side of the yard, a boy braces his feet and turns the upper stone of the quern, the grind a steady stone-on-stone whisper. You take a turn there, too, and feel the meal sift warm into the waiting tray. The rhythm of shared labour coats the evening with calm. A door creaks, a kettle lid lifts, a dog huffs and resettles closer to the coals. Harp strings plucked by an apprentice send small, silvery notes through the smoke, seeming to hang in the rafters of dark sky before dropping back into the light. A woman laughs softly when a spark jumps onto her apron, and without breaking her talk, she pats it out with the edge of a damp cloth, the movement so sure it feels like part of a dance you have nearly learned. The fort's shape and craft reveal themselves once your eyes adjust to smoke and dusk. The earthen rampart rises in a patient green curve, grass-crowned and slick with rain, and behind it a palisade of sharpened stakes stands shoulder to shoulder, the wood blackened near the tips by old scorching. A narrow causeway bridges the ditch, and the gate's framing timbers are sunk deep, so that passing beneath them feels like walking under roots into the hollow of a tree. Paths of trodden clay run from house to house, and each dwelling shows its own handwork. Wattle and daub walls, chalky and warm in the firelight, stout posts set in the ground, and roofs of rye, straw, and rush bound in layers, pegged with hazel so the wind will comb it but not lift it. Smoke slides from the eaves rather than a chimney, seeping through the thatch in faint blue threads, and inside each roundhouse a peat-stoked hearth anchors the floor of beaten earth, with woven mats to soften the places where people kneel or sit. You catch the scale of daily life in the outbuildings, a byre smelling of hay and animal breath, a shed with tools hung along a beam, a small storehouse with its door toward the lee side where milk pans cool and wrapped cheese rests. Beyond one threshold, a low stone-lined passage leads into the ground, a chill place used to keep butter firm and grain dry, and a young cousin explains it with the pride of a guide, showing the cleverness of kin. Life here rests on kin and custom, each household bound to the others by work, marriage, and the law of welcome. Cattle breathe warm mist into the night, their value measured not only in meat or milk, but in the way they seal alliances and pay obligations, and the herder's care has a tenderness born from that weight. A smith near a sheltered wall fans his coals with measured strokes, coaxing a knife edge back to life, while a woodworker shapes a peg with an adze, his motions practiced enough to carve and talk at once. Guests are expected, not as a constant stream, but as a thread through the fabric of the year, and the old law, carried in memory and recited by those who keep such things, makes space for travellers to find bread, a corner, and a seat by the fire. A boy who is not the woman's birth son leans against her knee as she knots a cord. He is fostered here for a season to learn good habits, to bind families with shared care, and to widen the circle of those he will call kin. The harper, still learning, borrows tunes from an elder who remembers older words, and when the elder speaks of customs, he lifts his eyes to the edge of the firelight, where the learned ones stand ready to bless the cattle and the fields. Your letter nudges at your thoughts even as you hold a cup, a small weight reminding you that you are also bound to a road beyond this bank and ditch, and the reminder sits alongside the comfort rather than disturbing it. Evening deepens, and the line between errands and celebration blurs into a single gentle rhythm. Grain chuffs into the flames from small hands, bright seeds leaping and turning black in the hot light, and a murmur of blessing rises, carrying the names of fields and animals and the wish for safe wintering. The cattle settle, hooves shuffling, tails brushing flies that the cool has already hushed, and the dogs make their last circuit before curling tight like commas at the fire's edge. Mist thickens at the rim of the earth bank, softening the palisade into a darker band and tucking the settlement away, as if beneath a blanket drawn up to the chin. A woman feeds the hearth with one last slab of peat, and then banks the glow with ash, drawing the night close, but not closing it entirely, because coals should last till dawn. Your satchel rests by your feet, the letter still sealed, its purpose neither forgotten nor urgent in this moment, simply waiting the way a field waits under frost. Quiet talk replaces scraping, hauling and clatter, and you find your voice moving at the slow pace of the others, words rounding themselves against the warmth, while the ring of light holds steady inside the drifting dark. The meal begins with simple abundance, a hush falling as bowls of steaming barley broth are ladled into waiting hands. You cradle the wooden vessel, the rim warm against your fingers, and breathe in the soft sweetness of parsnip and carrot, the green trace of leek, the comfort of fat simmered long with bones. Flat rounds of oat bread, baked on hot stones by the hearth until their edges freckle and crisp, are passed along on a wicker tray, and you tear a piece that flakes into tender crumbs. Someone hands you a cup carved from ash wood, filled with mead that smells of heather and late flowers, a mellow note rising through peat smoke and damp wool. Conversation flows in small eddies. A woman laughing at a child's crooked braid. A man describing how the last of the turnips were pulled before the rain settled. A young shepherd boasting gently of a lamb that thrived against the odds. A harp's quiet, plucking threads through it all, notes shimmering like rain across stone, easing the space between strangers until the circle feels close and kind. You eat slowly, warming from the center outward, listening to the fire's soft breathing and the sigh of wet thatch beyond the palisade. Fellowship takes shape in small gestures, more eloquent than any ceremony. A grey-bearded elder touches his spoon to the ground in a tiny offering before his first mouthful, and several others mirror him, each motion unshowy and sure, as if well practiced since childhood. A girl breaks a corner from her bread and places it near the fire on a flat slate, an unspoken share for those who cannot sit at the circle any more, while her brother leans forward to coax a brighter blaze from the slow wood. A woman in a blue-dyed shawl lifts a sprig of rowan and murmurs blessings for the cattle, her words low and steady, and those around her repeat them like a tide, trusting in their rise and fall. You feel a calloused hand at your elbow, guiding your bowl toward a second ladle of broth, and when you begin to protest, the man only shakes his head, content that you should eat enough to travel well. There is talk of ashes carried home in pots this night, to relight hearths with coals from the common flame, so that each house wakes to the same warmth in the morning, a bright thread tying the settlement together. You sip the last of your mead, and the sweetness lingers, a reminder that even in the year's dimming, honeyed light persists. Stories take their turn as the blaze rises and leans, casting tall companions on the walls of earth. Harvest talk comes first. Which field gave more grain than expected? Which cow calved late but strong? Which path down from the summer pastures turned slick underfoot with the first frost? Then the elders turn to older things, and the timbre of their voices lowers, steadier, as if speaking for more than themselves. They tell how, at this hinge of the year, the bright half gives way to the dark, and the world draws a long breath. The belief is not a frightening one here, only a careful understanding. The dead walk near to the living, and it is fitting to feed them with memory and flame, so no one wanders unfed or unwelcomed. You hear how doorways were once left unlatched and tables set with an extra place. How people carried embers across thresholds to guide familiar footsteps. How herds were driven through smoke for protection when summer roads turned inward toward winter folds. Somewhere in this gentle exchange, someone asks what brings you across these hills, and you find yourself speaking plainly. A letter, wrapped in oiled leather against the rain, for a household beyond the valley, whose name patterns the wax seal. Heads nod around the circle, and a woman whose hair is plaited with a bronze pin offers to point the turn you will need at first light, because messages travel like seeds and should be carried carefully. The letter becomes part of the night's pattern, folded into the weave of talk as naturally as any other duty. A man from the outer huts sets a little cup of sour milk by the fire, and says his mother taught him to do the same in gratitude, for travellers and unseen guests alike. He gestures toward your satchel and smiles, as if your errand belongs to that same category of kindness. Across the flames, a boy leans on his father's knee to ask whether their own grandparents will know the way if the paths are dark, and the father murmurs that the blaze is a beacon for all who loved this place, that no trail is lost if a name is remembered. You add your own small offering, a crust of bread, and a whispered thought of those who once saw you off on a rain-silvered morning, and in the act you are neither performer nor outsider, only a person among other people making space for the past. The harpist begins a tune that seems older than words, the strings catching firelight and turning it to sound, and nearby a bone whistle answers in a thin, sweet voice. Someone mentions the monastery by the coast where seals haul out on black rocks, and how the brothers will be glad such a letter travels inland by steady hands, for winter storms make sea paths uncertain. Without any talk of reward, you are told of a ford that runs shallow if you keep to the alder shade, and of a ridge where a lone thorn marks the safest way, ordinary clues turned tender by the season. In time the fire settles into a low, steady pulse, its heart a bed of embers the colour of rowan berries, and conversation gentles to quiet pockets. A few people rise to tend the outer windbreaks, laying fresh turf along the base, while others pull their cloaks tighter and simply watch the coals breathe. From across the dark valley comes a faint thrumming of drums and the thin call of pipe or whistle, carried by the same drift that brings the smell of wet grass. The sound is soft in the distance, yet clear enough to sketch a ring of neighbours on far hills, holding their own watch in kind. You listen, and the sense of the settlement stretches village to village, field to field, a chain of glowing circles under cloud, each one a small haven where bread is broken and names are spoken. A grandmother by your side traces the sign she learned as a girl, not to turn you away but to fold you in, and you realize that your errand, simple as it is, threads you into more than a single road. The last sip of mead tastes of time and smoke, and the harp's notes fall away until only the log's soft settling and a child's drowsy sigh remain. You rest your hands to the warmth, feel your breath join the even rhythm around you, and allow the night to hold all that is closing and all that will open without haste. The evening gathers itself around you as you step beneath the timber gate and into a ring of light, and the elders tell you the meaning of this night, the summer's end, when the bright half of the year yields to the dark. You feel the word settle into you like a long exhale, and the mist that drifts from the Atlantic seems to agree, softening edges and smoothing voices. A central blaze takes its time, breathing in the damp and then steadying, the fire licking up through carefully stacked wood until the sparks hang like seeds in the air. You learn that many here count the new year from this turning, not at a cold midpoint in winter, but at the hinge where harvest closes and the waiting season begins. The people speak gently about how, on nights like this, the boundary between the everyday world and the hidden one grows thin, and attention becomes a kind of hospitality. You are invited to share that attention, to listen as much as you look, and to let the warmth of the flame teach your body how the year tilts. The bonfire rises from a pit carefully prepared, the earth around it draped with fresh rushes to keep the mud from becoming a slick. A pair of older men explain how the first spark is best brought from a clean ember rather than an old sooty hearth, so that what is kindled tonight will be carried clear into the months ahead. One woman, her hair bound with a strip of undyed wool, holds a lidded clay pot near the heat, ready to trap a coal when the time is right, to take home and wake her family's fire anew. Children step forward in a ring, each with a small pouch tied from linen scraps, and toss handfuls of grain into the blaze. The kernels flicker like tiny stars before they char and vanish, a wish for the fields to rest and wake again. Smoke slides low across the yard and then lifts, sliding over the palisade and out into the sleeping pasture where cattle stand huddled, their breath silver in the dusk. You hear an older story of years when herds were walked between paired fires for protection, the smoke thought to carry off illness and mischief, and you picture it, the slow procession of horn and hide, the embers sighing as hooves pass. Around the fire, blessings ripple outward in a calm pattern, first for the animals, then for the stores, then for the travellers and the unseen guests. A thin line of ash is rubbed along the horns of a bull, and the beast blinks, patient, while a soft chant threads the moment together. The words are old, you are told, old enough to be part of the land itself. A bowl of water, warmed at the edge of the blaze, is lifted and let fall in 3 drops upon the threshold of the granary, and the keeper of the stores answers each drop with a quiet promise to guard the oats and barley from damp. Voices mention butter, salt, cured meat, and cheese, all counted and checked, then tucked away under clean cloth. This is a night of reckoning as much as blessing. A musician plucks a slow pattern on a harp whose strings glow in the firelight, and the notes seem to braid with the smoke and the words, a low weaving of sound that steadies the heart. You eat a piece of oat bread that is still faintly warm, its rough sweetness grounding you, while a roasted root splits under your thumb to reveal creamy steam, and a small wedge of soft cheese cools your tongue after the burn of the fire. As the blaze settles into coals that hold their red like banked berries, the conversation turns towards the ones who walked before, and all the ways a household may make room for memory without fear. A plate is set near the fire with slivers of bread and cheese, and a cup of watered ale is placed beside it, not for living mouths, but as a gentle invitation for kin who might wander this way. A name is spoken now and then, not chanted, not shouted, just set into the air like a stone in a wall, solid and careful, and a pause follows each one as if space were being made. You notice that the doorway of one hut is left a finger-width open to the night, not to let out heat, but to let in grace. No one presses you to see anything strange or to expect a sign. Instead, the custom itself does the work, the act of setting the place, the act of remembering, the act of keeping the fire honest and hospitable. You think of your own road and the feet that walked it before yours, and the way the path sometimes feels known even when you have never seen it. Near the blaze, 2 kinds of learning meet without strain, and you feel them not as rivals, but as 2 hands steadying the same bowl. A grey-cloaked elder, the keeper of old words, recites a charm that names the winds and the fields, and those listening nod as if recognizing a well-worn song. Some here still call such a person a drowe in the old tongue. Beside him stands a traveller with a leather satchel and a simple cross stitched to his cloak, who speaks a psalm in calm syllables learned from monastic pages inland. He traces the sign of blessing, not over the fire, which needs no changing, but over the people gathered, and a murmur answers him without unease. You are told that in the 9th and 10th centuries, many communities carry both patterns, prayers for saints and prayers for seasons, without breaking the cloth of their days. The old and the new share the same breath in this weather, and the fire listens to both without favour, crackling softly as if to say that warmth is warmth. As the night leans deeper, the rituals simplify into watching, and the year's circle becomes clear in the smallness of what is done well. Someone passes a clay lamp filled with tallow and a twist of rush for a wick, and its mild flame is like a quiet cousin to the great fire, meant for a single doorway. You help draw a small rake over the coals, banking them so that one side glows and the other rests, ready for morning touch. The gesture is ordinary and ceremonial at once. A woman ties a new knot in the thatch cord that holds back the hut's skin of bundles, a marker to count the turnings until light returns stronger, and a child watches, intent, as if learning script. The mist outside thickens and moves, but inside the ring the air feels shaped, held, and every task, the ladle dipped and hung, the cloak folded and set by the doorway, belongs to the same slow promise. When your hands are warm and your ears are full of harp echoes and the soft patter of rain on timber, you feel the turning not as a sharp edge but as a rounded curve. The year closing and beginning in the same breath, a door left gently ajar for what has been and what will be. The work of night begins with the quieting of the blaze, and you kneel beside the hearth to help school the red heart of it. A woman with a soot-darkened shawl shows you how to rake the glowing coals inward, folding them under a soft drift of ash so they breathe slowly through the long hours. The smell that rises is sweet and earthy, peat and char mingled with something like rain-soaked moss, and in the hush you hear the tiny clicks of charcoal settling. A boy carries split turf in a wicker creel, and you tuck 2 stout pieces on the outer edge, a promise for dawn when flame will catch from these banked embers. Iron tongs clink softly against the hearthstone, and a flat slate is eased across the front to shelter the warmth from draughts that creep along the floor. When the last tongue of flame has curled back into the red core, the circle around the fire exhales, content with the slow, steady glow that remains. One of the elders traces a brief sign in the air, custom and habit, old as the memory of the place, and the room takes on the even breathing of a house that knows what to do when darkness comes. Around the yard, inside the earthen bank, other small labours carry a sense of practised care, and you lend your hands where you can. Cattle are called by name and guided to the byre, their breath steaming, their hooves thudding softly against packed earth, while a gate bar slips into place. Sheep pass like grey water through a hurdle gap, folded into a pen where dry bracken has been laid, and the last pig is coaxed away from a trough with a peeled stick and a murmured bribe of peelings. A dog settles at the threshold of a storehouse, head on paws, ears pricking at any sound beyond the palisade, while an older man checks the lashings that hold the door. Tools are leaned along a wall, edge turned in, and a smear of grease is rubbed onto an iron bit to keep the wet from biting it through the long damp. Someone tips the quern's upper stone to rest so little fingers do not trap themselves in the night, and a leather cover is pulled over a basket of sieved meal to keep out mice. None of it is hurried, none of it loud. It is a curtained sequence that draws the settlement inward and makes a boundary between the fields and the fire-lit world within. When the last latches set, you are guided to a round house with a roof like an upturned nest, straw and reeds combed into a neat cone that sheds the drizzle. The doorway is low, and you duck, feeling the brush of a woven curtain against your shoulder as you step onto a floor, layered with rushes and mats of twisted reeds. The walls are wattle and daub, a lattice filled with clay and straw that holds the day's warmth and keeps the wind's edge blunt. Smoke from a peat clod smoulders in a stone ring, thinning as it climbs and slinks out through the thatch, so the air is blue and fragrant but not choking. On the wall hang cloaks, wet along their hems, and beside them a row of wooden pegs holds small things: a spindle, a coil of cord, a spoon carved with a knotwork flourish. In a corner, baskets are set like sleeping creatures, their bellies round with oats and dried beans, their lids tied with plaited grass. The room is simple and close, yet its order is reassuring, and your shoulders settle as you learn its small rhythms: the creak of a settled post, the whisper of fibres when the curtain stirs. The touch of sleep prepares itself in textures, and you begin to notice every fabric and fibre that will hold you through the long hours. A blanket is offered, thick with lanolin and the faint, clean scent of rain, its woolen surface springy under your palm like the back of a grazing sheep. Beneath it, a pad of straw and heather yields to your weight, rustling, the stems arranged so their ends do not prick, covered by a woven mat that keeps the scratch at bay. You unfasten your cloak and fold it, its rough weave rasping softly as the nap catches the light of the ember bed, and a woman lays another cloak across your feet as an extra hush against the chill that slips along the floor. Others find their places without fuss. 2 children curl near their mother, a man rolls his shoulders and tucks a felted cap under his head, and you are placed along the outer curve where the wall's warmth lingers. A wooden bucket sits within reach, filled earlier with warm water to wash hands, and its surface shows a faint circular ripple when a draught passes the door. Voices diminish to murmurs, then breaths, and through the matting and your blanket you feel the house collect itself like a cupped hand. Safety is a shape you can sense as much as see, and it lies in the ring of the rampart as much as in the patience of shared tasks. Beyond the bank, the fields dissolve into a pearly vapour that carries the smell of wet grass and the far hiss of the sea. But inside the enclosure the sounds are domestic and close. A tether ring clinks, a hen shuffles once on her perch, a ladder is drawn inside. Food is a circle too, and you saw it earlier in the stacked shelves, round cheeses turned so their rinds dry evenly, sacks of oats tightened at the mouth, smoked cuts of meat brushed with salt, and hung from pegs to keep them out of the reach of paws. A small jar of honey sits wrapped in cloth near the back of a chest, and a sealed pot of butter, thick and pale, is set where the coolest air moves. People here know to bury such riches in cold, wet ground when they must keep them for months. The talk, before it faded, counted work to come. Mending fences before frost hardens the posts, patching thatch where a star can be seen through, sharing the grind of meal so no one's hands carry the ache alone. These are measures for the dark half of the year, remedies and promises, and you feel the comfort of their naming more than any single firebrand's glow. Even the oil lamp's wick is pinched and left with a tail to catch again in the morning, a small prayer made practical. As you lie back, the music that floated over the yard thins to the memory of strings plucked far away, and then to the wind threading the thatch. The breath of the peat fades to a steady warmth, a slow heart you can turn your palms toward under the blanket, and the clean heft of wool gathers along your shoulders. Your mind follows the curve of the year the elders spoke of, not as a hard edge, but as a smooth turn, like a cartwheel rolling from stubble into fallow, from noise into quiet. The rampart holds the night like a bowl, and you can imagine the ditch dark with dew, the bank tufted with wet grass, the gate bar set firm, while a watchful figure makes one last unhurried round. On another shelf, a tally stick lies where it can be found, notched to mark what stores remain, and beside it a bundle of dried herbs hangs to sweeten broth and soothe throats when the damp settles in. You close your eyes on these small, ordered things, letting them stack in your thoughts like neat-cut turves, and the ember core waits under its ash, ready for the hand you will offer it when light returns. In this held moment, the new year begins not with shout or clamour, but with breath and warmth and the soft, patient work of a house at rest. The night settles around you like a cloak that remembers your shape. Beyond the palisade, the dark rolls out towards the sea without an edge, but here the world feels gathered in, stitched together by shared breath and slow, patient fire. You listen to the long hush between gusts, to the soft crumble of peat on the coals, and to the small sounds a place makes when it is at rest. Wool whispering against skin, a cup set down, the faintest creak of wicker and wood adapting to the cool. This turning time asks very little of you. It does not hurry. It simply holds open a doorway where dusk becomes night, and where old light hands itself to new darkness with a nod. You feel that handing over in your own chest, the tide of it rising and ebbing through your ribs. The year narrows to a quiet point, and then widens again, like a breath you do not need to force. You are part of the rhythm that has always been here, root and rain, hearth and harvest, sleep and waking, each one yielding to the other without fuss. Somewhere outside, mist threads the grasses and lays a cool palm on the rampart. Somewhere above, the stars arrange themselves into stories older than any tongue. Within, warmth holds steady. You sense the presence of those who walked this path before you, not as a crowd or a clamour, but as a gentle company that knows the way through the dim places. Their kindness feels like a shawl pulled round your shoulders, woven of memory and field and flame. In that company you are both guest and kin, briefly lit by the same fire, welcomed by the same bread, carried by the same song. The blanket grows heavier and kinder. The smoke-sweet air is a low lullaby, a peat-scented tide drawing you toward the shore of sleep. If there is a veil tonight, it rests lightly as a cobweb on morning heather, tender and easily borne. You need not cross it or search it. It is enough to be where you are, within walls built to keep wind at a respectful distance, within a circle made to gather warmth, within a season that knows how to keep watch while you let go. Let the embers keep their small red promises. Let the hills continue their long, dark breathing. Let the year turn on its silent hinge while you drift with it, easy as a leaf on a slow stream. Your eyes grow warm and quiet. The last notes of music become the wind, and the wind becomes sleep, and sleep becomes a gentle path that carries you deeper into the safe, soft night.